October 2011. A homeless man wanders into an upscale LA restaurant. Staff rush to escort him out. Standard procedure, right? But when Clint Eastwood recognized what that filthy military jacket meant, he didn't just stop the removal, he did something that left 40 wealthy diners sitting in stunned, uncomfortable silence, forced to answer a question none of them wanted to face. How many veterans have you walked past today? Only it was a quiet Tuesday evening at Osteria Mozza in Los Angeles. The kind of evening where the wealthy came to forget the world existed outside their $200 plates of pasta. Soft lighting, quiet conversations, the clink of expensive wine glasses. Clint Eastwood sat at his usual corner table, 81 years old, still commanding, still watchful. He'd chosen this table deliberately, tucked away by the window where he could see the street, without being seen by most diners. Away from the autograph seekers, away from the Hollywood circus he'd spent 60 years navigating. He was reading a script between bites of pasta when the commotion started near the entrance. Two staff members were escorting someone out, firmly, efficiently, the way you remove a problem before it becomes a scene. The man wasn't being aggressive, he was confused, disoriented, trying to understand why hands were pulling him toward the door. Most diners glanced up briefly, registered that an inappropriate person was being removed, then returned to their meals, their conversations, their carefully constructed evening. But Clint kept watching. The man was probably mid-60s. Though homelessness makes age hard to read, it carves destruction into faces, adds decades that aren't really there. His hair was matted, his clothes torn and stained, with the kind of dirt that doesn't wash out because there's nowhere to wash. But what made Clint put down his fork was the jacket. Underneath the grime, the jacket was military issue, and on the back, barely visible through the dirt and wear, 3 words: U.S., Marines, Vietnam. His name was Robert Chen, 67 years old, homeless for 6 years. He had been a Marine sergeant, 2 tours in Vietnam, then 30 years as a machinist in a factory that no longer existed. But PTSD, unemployment, divorce, and a series of bad decisions had led him here, to the streets, living under the 405 freeway with other forgotten veterans. Tonight, medication-induced confusion had carried Robert not just to the restaurant window, where he'd stood hundreds of times watching people eat, remembering he'd once been normal too, but through the door. Suddenly he was standing in the middle of the restaurant, staring at white tablecloths and wine glasses, wondering how he'd gotten there. The manager, Vincent, had immediately signaled for removal. "Sir, you need to leave," Vincent said firmly, his voice carrying that particular tone of polite but absolute authority. "This is a private establishment." Robert looked confused. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "Please leave now, or we'll call the police." When Robert didn't move fast enough, 2 staff members took his arms and started walking him out. That's when Clint Eastwood stood up. "Wait!" The word cut through the restaurant noise like a blade. The entire dining room went quiet. Not the natural quiet of conversation pausing, the unnatural quiet of 40 people simultaneously holding their breath. People recognized that voice before they even turned to see who had spoken. That distinctive rasp, that unmistakable tone of command. When they saw Clint Eastwood standing at his corner table, every conversation stopped dead. Vincent, the manager, froze mid-step. The 2 staff members holding Robert's arms froze. Robert himself seemed too confused to react. His mind still trying to catch up with events. Clint walked toward them with that distinctive, purposeful stride, the one that had carried him through 100 films, the one that made people move out of the way without him asking. "Let him go," Clint said quietly. Vincent's face went pale. "Mr. Eastwood, I apologize for the disturbance. We'll have him removed immediately." I said, "Let him go." The staff released Robert's arms like they'd been burned. Clint stepped closer, his eyes fixed on that torn military jacket, on those 3 words barely visible through the grime. "Are you a Marine?" he asked Robert directly. Robert looked at Clint with confusion, slowly giving way to recognition. That face. Everyone knew that face. Yes, I was," Robert managed. "What's your name and service?" "Sergeant Robert Chen, 1st Marine Division." Vietnam. 2 tours, 68 and 70. Clint was quiet for a moment, his weathered face unreadable. 81 years old, looking at a 67-year-old man who'd aged 30 years beyond his actual life. Then he turned to Vincent. "This man is a United States Marine," Clint said. his voice carrying to every corner of the now silent restaurant. He served 2 tours in Vietnam, while most of us were safe at home, and you were about to throw him out like garbage. Vincent opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Mr. Eastwood, I didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't ask, Clint interrupted. You saw someone homeless and decided he didn't belong here. The restaurant was dead silent. 40 of Los Angeles' most successful people, producers, executives, attorneys, entrepreneurs, sat frozen. This wasn't supposed to happen at Osteria Mozza. This was where you came to escape reality, not confront it. You know what that jacket means? Clint continued, his voice low but carrying absolute authority. It means he earned the right to stand anywhere in this country he wants to stand. It means while we were here safe, comfortable, building careers and bank accounts, he was in a jungle getting shot at so we could have that privilege. Vincent looked like he wanted the floor to open and swallow him. Clint turned back to Robert. Have you eaten today? Robert shook his head slowly. No, sir. Then you're eating now, Clint said. With me. He gestured toward his corner table. Robert stared at him, not comprehending. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like him. Come on, Clint said, more gently now. Oh, I've got a table by the window. Good view. You can tell me about Vietnam. I can't, Robert stammered, suddenly aware of how he looked, how he smelled, how wrong he was for this place. I don't belong. You're a Marine who served his country, Clint said firmly. You belong wherever you damn well choose to be. Now come sit down before your pasta gets cold. The walk from the entrance to Clint's corner table was perhaps 30 feet. But in those 30 feet, Robert Chen, homeless Marine veteran, invisible man, street ghost, walked past 40 of Los Angeles' most successful people, past tables where single meals cost more than he'd spent on food in a month, past shocked faces and open mouths, through the kind of stunned silence that only comes when everyone present realizes they're witnessing something extraordinary, something that will become a story they tell for years. Clint pulled out a chair for Robert, waited until he sat down, then took his own seat across from him. Vincent, Clint called to the manager, who was still standing frozen by the entrance, looking like he'd just watched his career flash before his eyes. We need another menu, another place setting, and whatever the kitchen recommends tonight. Vincent nodded mutely. And Vincent? Clint's voice stopped him. The next time a veteran walks through that door, you treat them like they own the place. Because, in a very real sense, they do. Yes, Mr. Eastwood, Vincent managed to say. Of course. Around them, the restaurant slowly began to breathe again. Conversations resumed, but quieter now, subdued. Every diner kept glancing at the corner table where Clint Eastwood and a homeless Marine were sitting together. Some looked guilty, some looked moved, some looked uncomfortable, like they wanted to leave but couldn't without making it worse. A few pulled out their phones, but something about the moment made them put them back. This wasn't something to photograph. This was something to witness. The waiter brought menus, place settings, water. His hands shook slightly as he set everything down. He'd worked at Osteria Mozza for 3 years and had never seen anything like this. Robert sat completely still, like if he moved too much, the illusion would shatter, and he'd find himself back on the street where he belonged. But Clint just opened his menu like this was the most natural thing in the world. "So, the carbonara here is exceptional," he said. "You like pasta?" What happened over the next 2 hours would become legendary among the Osteria Mozza staff. Clint didn't just share a table with Robert. He talked with him, really talked. Not the way you talk to someone you're doing charity for. That performative compassion where you're already thinking about how good the story will sound later. But the way you talk to someone whose story you actually want to hear. Robert, after the initial shock wore off, began to speak about growing up in San Francisco, son of Chinese immigrants who'd worked themselves to death in restaurants, not unlike this one, about joining the Marines at 19 because he wanted to prove he was American, wanted to belong, about Vietnam, not the dramatic combat stories that civilians expect, but the small moments, the heat that never stopped, the fear that became so constant you stopped noticing it, the friends who didn't come home, the ones who did but left pieces of themselves in the jungle. Clint listened without interrupting. He didn't try to relate or compare or minimize. He just listened the way you listen when someone is telling you something important. "After I came back," Robert said, picking at his pasta carbonara with trembling hands. I couldn't figure out how to be normal again. Everyone else just went on with their lives like nothing had happened. I got a job, got married, had kids, but I was always angry, always drinking. PTSD? Clint asked. They didn't call it that back then, Robert said. Just told me to toughen up, move on. So I tried. For 30 years I tried. Then the factory closed. My wife left. My kids stopped talking to me. One day I realized I didn't have anywhere to go home to. Clint was quiet for a moment. You have kids? Robert's face clouded. 2, son and daughter. Haven't seen them in 6 years. They think I'm dead. Maybe better that way. That's not better, Clint said firmly. It's never better. Around them, the restaurant had returned to something approaching normal activity. People were eating again, talking again, but quietly, respectfully, like they were in the presence of something sacred. Every diner kept glancing at the corner table, some with curiosity, some with guilt, some with tears in their eyes. A woman at a nearby table, a studio executive who'd greenlit 3 films that year, excused herself to the restroom and cried for 10 minutes. When she came back, she left a $500 tip on a $150 meal and wrote on the receipt, "For the Veterans Fund." She wasn't the only one. By the end of the night, the staff would collect over $3,000 in extra tips, all designated for veterans. But at the corner table, Clint and Robert just talked. About Vietnam, about loss, about what it means to serve, about what it means to come home and find that home doesn't exist anymore. When they finished eating, Clint signaled for Vincent. "I need the check." "Mr. Eastwood?" Vincent said nervously. "Your meal is complimentary, of course." "Both meals." "That's not what I asked for," Clint said. "I need the check, and I need a pen." Vincent brought both. The check for 2 pasta dishes, 2 salads, and wine came to $240. Clint looked at it, then looked at Robert. "Robert," Clint said, "I'm going to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. If I could change one thing about your situation right now, just one thing, what would it be?" Robert thought for a long moment. The question was so unexpected, so impossible, that he almost couldn't process it. "I'd want to see my kids again," he finally said, his voice breaking. "Just once, just to tell them I'm sorry, that I know I failed them." Clint nodded and pulled out his phone. He dialed a number. Someone answered on the second ring. "David," Clint said into the phone, "I need you to do something for me tonight. I need you to find Robert Chen's children. Son and daughter, probably mid-30s, somewhere in California." A pause. "Because I'm asking you to. Thank you." He hung up and looked at Robert, whose face had gone white. "David Webb is my producer," Clint explained. "He's very good at finding people. Give me your kids' names." Robert, tears now streaming down his weathered face, whispered, "Michael and Sarah Chen." Clint texted the names, then turned back to the check. He wrote something on the signature line, signed it, and handed it to Vincent. Vincent's hands started shaking when he looked at it. On the signature line, where the tip should be, Clint had written $5,000. And below that, "Starting tomorrow, Robert Chen eats here free anytime he wants for the rest of his life. Put it on my tab." And the same goes for any other veteran who walks through that door. At the bottom of the check, in Clint's distinctive handwriting, "The next time you see a homeless person in a military jacket, remember that they stood between you and war. They earned the right to stand anywhere. I'm Clint Eastwood." Vincent looked up, tears in his eyes. "Mr. Eastwood, I'm so sorry. I didn't—" "You didn't see him," Clint said simply. "Start seeing them." He stood, helped Robert to his feet, and walked him to the door. The entire restaurant watched them leave in silence. What happened after that night is the part most people never heard. David Webb found Michael and Sarah Chen within 36 hours. Both lived in Southern California. Michael was a high school teacher in Orange County. Sarah was a nurse in San Diego. Neither had heard from their father in 6 years. Both thought he was probably dead. When David called and explained that Clint Eastwood had met their father at a restaurant and that their father wanted to see them, they thought it was a scam, some cruel joke. It took considerable convincing, including David sending photos and having Clint himself call before they agreed to meet. The reunion happened at a Santa Monica park, arranged by Clint, who didn't attend, but ensured everything was set up properly. He'd arranged for Robert to be cleaned up, given new clothes, given dignity. Michael and Sarah arrived skeptical, defensive, prepared for disappointment. prepared to see the man who'd abandoned them, who'd chosen alcohol over his family, who disappeared into the streets rather than face his failures. They found their father sitting on a bench wearing clean clothes, looking more like the man they remembered. When Robert saw his children for the first time in 6 years, he broke down completely. The reunion wasn't easy. There were years of pain to work through. Years of anger and abandonment and hurt. But it was a beginning. And sometimes, a beginning is all you need. Clint quietly arranged for Robert to enter comprehensive VA treatment. When the system wouldn't cover certain costs, and the VA system rarely covers everything, Clint paid out of pocket. He set up a trust fund for housing after treatment, made sure Robert got the mental health care he'd needed for 40 years but never received. 6 months later, Robert moved into a studio apartment in Long Beach. Small, but his. 4 walls, a door that locked, a bed that wasn't concrete. His relationship with his children healed slowly. Therapy helped. Time helped. Proving he was sober helped more. Michael and Sarah didn't forgive immediately. Forgiveness doesn't work that way. But they started talking. Started rebuilding something that looked like a family. Robert volunteered at a veteran center in Los Angeles, helping other homeless vets navigate the system that had failed him. He knew every loophole, every frustration, every reason the system made it easier to give up than to get help. He became a guide for the lost, a voice for the invisible. And every Thursday, Robert ate at Osteria Mozza, sometimes alone, sometimes with veterans from the tent city he'd left behind. Men and women still living under the 405, still invisible, still waiting for someone to see them, sometimes with his son or daughter. Vincent and the staff learned every veteran's name, their service history, their favorite dishes, what they'd been through, what they needed. The restaurant became known in the veteran community as a place where you were welcome regardless of your circumstances, where military service meant something, where nobody got thrown out for looking wrong. Word spread quietly through the homeless veteran network. There's a place in LA where they see you. Clint never publicized what he'd done. He never called press, never used it for promotion, never mentioned it in interviews. The story became known only because Robert told it, to explain to other veterans that sometimes someone sees you. 2 years later, Robert spoke at a veterans event in Los Angeles. "I was invisible for 6 years," he said. "Thousands of people passed me every day. I was just a problem to be removed, an uncomfortable reality to be ignored. And then one person looked at my jacket and saw past the dirt and the smell and the failure. He saw the Marine I used to be. And that changed everything." In 2014, Clint quietly established a program with the LA VA to identify homeless veterans and connect them with comprehensive services, housing, treatment, job training, family reconnection. Funded entirely by his own money, the program has helped over 800 veterans find their way back. At the program's headquarters in downtown Los Angeles, there's a small plaque that reads, "See the person, not the problem. See the service, not the circumstances." Robert Chen is now 72 years old. He still eats at Osteria Mozza every Thursday. 8 years sober, reunited with both his children and 3 grandchildren he never knew existed. Working part-time at the Veteran Services Program, talking to homeless vets who remind him of who he used to be. Every anniversary of that October night, Robert sits at the same corner table where Clint sat with him, orders pasta carbonara, and thanks the waiter for seeing him. The waiter, a different one now, but trained in the same tradition, always replies the same way. "Thank you for your service, sir. This table is always yours." The story of Clint Eastwood and Robert Chen reminds us that visibility isn't about being seen. It's about being recognized. It's about someone looking past what you've become and remembering what you were, what you are, what you could be again. Clint could have ignored the commotion that night. He could have let the staff remove the homeless man and returned to his script. Nobody would have blamed him. It wasn't his problem. He had no obligation to get involved. Instead, he saw a Marine, and he refused to let that Marine be treated as less than he'd earned the right to be. The 40 diners who witnessed that night all left with a story they'd tell for years. But more importantly, they left with a question. How many people had they walked past, ignored, dismissed, without ever seeing who they really were? How many Robert Chens had they treated as problems instead of people? How many veterans had they failed to recognize? That question changed some of them. A few started volunteering at veterans centers. Others made donations to homeless services. Some simply started looking, really looking, at the people they passed on the street. Because once you've seen Clint Eastwood treat a homeless Marine with dignity, you can never unsee it. You can never walk past another veteran without wondering, what's their story? What have they survived? What do they deserve that I'm not giving them? If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to remember that every person you pass has a story, a history, a value that isn't diminished by their current circumstances. Have you ever looked past someone's appearance and seen their worth? Share your story in the comments below.